My name is Christopher Mitchell, and today I'll be talking about African enslavement. African enslavement began in the early 1500s. During the 1500s, enslavement of blacks began in Europe. Africans were Europe's first work source due to the uncivilization of Africa. Africans were taken away from their motherland and were stripped of their culture, religion, language, and land as a form of domestication. Africans weren't considered human, and more so was considered property. Africans were forced to do free labor and were treated wrong. The ideas of slavery led to what is now known as the prison system.
I'm Paul Thomas, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the statistics of slavery and how it led into the prison system. In 1840, there were apparently 2,187,455 slaves in the southern slave states. But after 10 years, in the 13 slave states, there were 3,045,000 slaves. And after Texas was eventually added, about 50,000 more slaves were added to the total number, bringing it up to 3,095,000 slaves in the states. At this time, slavery was not only in the United States, but also was in South America, especially Brazil, where there were about 3.25 million slaves. Now, when you count together the amount of slaves in the U.S., South America, the Spanish colonies, and so on, you have a total of 7.5 million slaves. Slavery was a way for slave owners or masters to exploit a way to get free labor from a group of individuals deemed to be inferior and not even considered human. It was a way to get products out as low of a cost as possible, and it worked perfectly for while it lasted because it did just that. And the prison system today is now just a carryover from that. It is another way for big business corporations and tycoon investors to maximize their profits and get their products out in the cheapest way possible, not having to pay legitimate wages. For example, the nation's prison industry now employs nearly 750,000 people, more than any Fortune 500 corporation other than General Motors. When slavery was in, you had more than 3 million slaves in America. So now you have over 2 million people incarcerated in the U.S., more than any other industrialized country. So in other words, it's almost identical to the numbers from slavery, and the pursuit of money is one of the key things that lead into slavery having a new life.
My name is Arturo Gil Gonzalez, and in this video I am going to be talking about incarceration rates. Some of the factors that could lead to someone being incarcerated is low education. Lower high school graduation rates show a greater likelihood of going to prison. In the book by Manning Marable, he talks about how in 1991 the number of Americans incarcerated in all state prisons were 711,700. Nearly two-thirds of all state prisoners in 1991 had less than a high school education, and one-third of all prisoners were unemployed at the time of their arrest. So some of the factors that could lead to incarceration are low education and unemployment. In the same study done by Marable, he states that about one half of all prisoners were black. 23% of all black males in their 20s were either in prison, on parole, on probation, or awaiting trial. Research from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights found that African Americans make up only 14% of all drug users nationally, but they account for 35% of all drug arrests, 55% of all drug convictions, and 75% of all persons admissions for drug offenses. Statistically today, more than 8 out of every 10 African Americans males will be arrested at some point in their lifetime. For young people who have never been to prison, African Americans are 9 times more likely to be sentenced to juvenile prisons than whites. African American males are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white males and 2.5 times more likely than Hispanic males. About 12% of the U.S. population is black, but yet in 2011, black Americans made up 30% of persons arrested for property offense and 38% of persons arrested for a violent offense. Black youth make up 16% of all children in America, but yet they make up 28% of juvenile arrests. 1 in every 10 black men in his 30s could end up in prison or jail on any given day.
Today I will be talking about incarceration and slavery and how it affects future generations. Over 14,000 prisoners are currently in Michigan State Correctional Facilities. Michigan is just one state of 50 and has less than 4% of the United States population. Although black people make up only 13% of all of Michigan's population, they make up an astounding 58% of all state prison inmates. Under existing law, prison officials can control virtually every aspect of a prisoner's life. They can decide when he will get up and when he will go to bed. They can decide how much money will be spent on his food and how it will be spent. They can set rules for prisoners and punish prisoners in many ways. They can decide who gets to visit a prisoner and for how long. They can decide how long a prisoner must wait before he gets medical treatment. They can decide that the prisoner will spend 24 hours a day in cell or 12 hours a day doing back-breaking labor. It is up to them. Under the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, slavery is not illegal. Slavery is illegal unless it is for conviction for a crime. In that case, slavery is perfectly legal. The actual text of the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery for involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Although a large number of white people are enslaved, blacks are rounded up at over 8 times the rate for whites, making this to some degree racially based slavery. What has changed over the last 400 years? Not much, only the improved cleverness of the slave masters in latching onto ingenious rationales to cloak their crimes. If United States ignores to consider the human rights and changing the law, slavery is not going to vanish.
Hi, my name is Mariah Miller, and my group is going to talk about the topic slavery and incarceration. And I'm going to go over how I think slavery impacted incarceration. Basically, slavery and incarceration are similar, but from different times. What slavery and being incarcerated have in common is that your freedom is basically taken away from you. Majority of the slave population was black, and majority of the population incarcerated is black, according to the NAACP. 1 million out of 2.3 people incarcerated is black. Slaves were also paid little to nothing for the hard work they did in the fields, and the same goes for prisoners because they work in shops, and the pay that they get paid for working in the shops is very little, and the pay helps them eat and get personals. It goes towards their books, basically. Also, when slaves were accused of something, they would instantly be punished for it, whether it was true or not. No one ever tried to figure out the truth. And that's just like in today's society, if a white woman accused a black man of raping her, he will most likely be charged and sent to prison based off her word. Also, slave masters and correctional officers are similar as well. They are similar because they get to tell inmates and slaves what to do and when to do it. And if a slave or an inmate didn't abide by the rules, they would be punished instantly. Also in prison, you have prisoners who have been there longer and feel like they run the place and feel like people who are new and just now come in, that they have to listen to them. Also with slavery, the slaves didn't like the head slave who was close to the master, because the head slave thought he was better than the others. Others, I mean like the slaves who were not close to the master, or the field slaves as we like to call them. There are many ways slavery and incarceration are similar, but the two also have some differences. In slavery, they weren't allowed to learn how to read and write. But when you go to prison, getting your education is recommended. It is an option to you. Also, each prison has to have a law library. In slavery, there were slaves who slept in the big house, but in prison, everyone sleeps in the same type of bed, or in a cell or in a dorm. It depends on the prison. But as you can see, there are some differences and similarities between slavery and incarceration. So still to this day, slavery just exists, just in a different form. Thank you.
Yeah, farewell. Hey, farewell. Hey, all my niggas, farewell. Vietnam. Yeah. Look, some niggas let they dirt out, some just keep it all in them. So when a man dies, all his